Welcome to our 2021 DIA one-on-one video series. Joining me is Scott Scarola from Syneos Health. Hi, Scott.
Hello, Terrence. So good to see you today. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for being part of the series. And we're going to talk about this new era of decentralized trials. We can't have a conversation today without talking about DCTs. So talk to me about what this trend means in terms of clinical development.
Sure, I would love to. Decentralized trials is certainly not anything new. From a decentralized trial perspective, how we look at it is it's kind of a sliding scale, right? You've got your traditional trials where you're using just maybe components that are decentralized tools, but that study's not necessarily decentralized. To us, decentralized trials are where we're really taking a very patient-centric approach, right? And we're taking activities out of a brick and mortar site location, and we're bringing those actually to the patient's home, right? And so that could be a sliding scale of a hybrid decentralized trial where we're doing some activities at the patient's home, or it could be a fully decentralized trial where all activities are being done remotely. If I could, I'd love to say some of the big trends that we're seeing in how we approach these decentralized trials is really in how we're bringing on board some of these technologies that augment our ability to do decentralized trials. From a Syneos Health perspective, what we really try to do is really leverage best-in-class technology partners and leverage our underlying infrastructure to support operational teams, our patients, trial participants, et cetera, to really get the full benefit of a decentralized trial experience.
What are some of those technologies that you're looking at?
Sure. So typically when we're talking about a decentralized trials, honestly, there's no difference in kind of the activities we do as part of a trial. Just throughout history, trials themselves haven't changed that much, but with the advent of the different technologies that we can bring into place to deliver these studies, we're changing the how we do those activities. And so there's a wide range of activities that we can decentralize, starting from really the patient funnel piece, right? Where do we get? How do we cast that net to find those patients, right? So, our digital recruitment activities, the consenting and the engagement. How do we engage with those patients from a virtual perspective, from a decentralized perspective? I think one of the big pieces that's so important to us is having those platforms to where we can bring a bunch of those technologies together, right? So that we can seamlessly deliver these different aspects, whether it's ECOA, right? The clinical outcomes assessment, whether it's the direct to patient IP shipment, right? How do we communicate between the randomization systems in the physician and the depot to make sure that we're controlling and bringing the drug right to the patient's home, and that we're able to have that audit trail to support it, right? I think the wearable sensors, right, and the data that's associated with how we're capturing. Think about the volume of the data that we're now seeing coming in on these trials. It's actually changing how we're doing monitoring, right? And so really equipping our operational teams, like our monitors and our data managers, with the infrastructure and the tools to be able to do what we've traditionally done on site or by phone, right? And then, I mean, I could go on and on about the different technologies, but the one thing that I would say is we've seen a couple of different approaches to solving this in the industry. I'm going on 20 some years in clinical trial operations, and I know several of our competitors, there's this space race to acquire decentralized technologies, et cetera. And one thing I can tell you I've learned is clinical research organizations are at the pinnacle of therapeutic expertise, processes, and just project management expertise on how to deliver clinical trials. I've I've yet to come across organizations that are really good at also being nimble technology development companies, right? And so that's kind of going into our thinking of how we're approaching decentralized trials. We want to stay in our sweet spot of our core competency of delivering therapeutically aligned, that expertise and that great delivery capability, but we want to leverage the right technology partners and the right technologies so that when we create a solution for our clients, that we're assembling the right pieces together, right? And we don't believe that any one resource organization can apply one technology to do all that. And so to me, it's really about how do we create that infrastructure underneath to be able to partner up with these really nimble, creative, innovative technology partners that are out there so that we can bring the right custom solution to our clients. And at the end of the day, really make the trial experience much more palatable for the folks that we need the most, which is the patients, right? Expanding that access and convenience so that we can get better retention, right? We can get more diversity in terms of how far out we can get at those patients, and then ultimately, the rates of keeping those patients engaged in the trial, aimed at really driving those therapies to market faster.
Excellent, Scott. And talking about patients, COVID-19 has changed everything for everyone over the last 400 plus days.
Yeah.
And how has the pandemic, though, changed patients' approach towards trials as well as pharma's approach towards trials?
Yeah. Great question. So, I think I mentioned, just from when we look at that question from the context of, how long have we been doing decentralized trials? I mean, I think we've been taking decentralized approaches for some time now, right? But I think one thing that this pandemic has certainly accelerated is really, I would say, three things. First of all, from a regulator's perspective, we've seen a lot more attention, interest, guidance from regulators. I mean, really recently, Danish Medicine's kind of put out some guidance around how, decentralized trials need to be evaluated to make sure that you're weighing the benefits, the strengths and the weaknesses of applying those in the context of the patient's care, right? So I think we've seen that. I think patient demand, right? I think we've seen an incredible patient demand. You guys actually put out a great article. I think it quoted something like, for healthcare providers, during the pandemic, we saw like 95% using like telehealth approaches, and now that it's kind of stabling off, it's still close to 80% are using telehealth as like a standard practice. From probably a sponsor CRO perspective, I'd say the biggest impact is, we're seeing increasing demand from the folks that we work with to decentralize components, whether there's higher, everybody is really driving, the whole industry is driving this concept of how do we expand access to more patients and really be patient-centric in our approach, right? And we are, that's like every day for us, right? That's when we look at designing trials, is how do we look at that patient journey and make sure that that we're maximizing, let me phrase that, we're minimizing the stress points that they have along that journey in that trial. But as sponsors and CROs, we've really had to think differently in terms of how we continue to deliver our research and development activities, right? We've had to expand our access, right? We've needed those technologies and those approaches to really widen that net. And it's cool because you look at, some of the preferred partners that we work with when we've applied kind of their technologies or their approaches, that it's enhanced our ability. I mean, we've seen as much as, like a 10x increase in recruitment capabilities, in terms of kind of the patient-centric designs, especially in that rare disease space, right? Taking kind of a decentralized approach along with like a patient concierge approach, we've been able to, for these rare disease patients that aren't anywhere near a site location, we can use like a patient transport and concierge service, maybe to get those patients in for their initial visit, right? Put up their family. But then, from a convenience perspective, we can start applying those decentralized approaches, whether it's telehealth, the in-home nursing, or the in-home sensors, to really enable that patient to continue to participate from the comfort of their own home. And so, to your question, I would say it's really forced us to get really creative in terms of how we do traditional study activities and decentralize our approaches to doing that. So great question.
Scott, if you had to pinpoint one transformation that is needed to improve the access for patients, as you just noted there, and increase diversity of patients in clinical trials, what would that be?
So, man, there's a couple there. I would say probably the two most impactful things that as a research community we could do. First of all, and this is really directed to, clinical research organizations, sponsor companies, technology companies, right? We need to be thinking about how do we really make these technologies interoperable within the context of an individual trial, right? There's so many cool technologies that are out there. We've got, my counterparts at other CROs have, they've acquired maybe individual assets, right? But those don't take advantage of the strength of the whole, like the whole technology and research community, right? And so what I would say is, I think the biggest transformative thing that we could do is really figure out from a standards perspective, how do we start using those technologies so it's not so painful to bring them together, right? It's not going to happen with an individual platform, and it's going to continue to remain a challenge as we try to piece these various different capabilities together, right? So to me, our dynamic assembly approach is really a great way to approach this, because it's kind of creating that standards infrastructure so you can plug in, right? So that those best in class can just map to it, right? You get that operational oversight and you get that monitoring oversight, right? So it's kind of that holistic view. So I would say the second thing is, again, as a community, really working with regulators, agencies to figure out, how do we come to middle ground? I mean, I think we've seen some great advancement in North America and in many of the European countries, but I think, it's still a challenge when you look in like Latin America or Asia Pacific, right? But really, from either from a cultural or from a regulatory perspective, you really take advantage of these up and coming technologies and methodologies to delivering trials. So I think, continuing to I would say be the squeaky wheel, right? Healthy debate. One of my mentors mentioned to me, right? It's continuing to drive that healthy debate with agencies, regulators, and sponsors, so that we're making things better for our patients that are participating in these trials. They're our friends and family, after all.
Two great points. Thank you so much. And I love the approach to dynamic assembly. Great takeaway. Thank you so much for joining us for our DIA one-on-one video series, Scott.
Man, I'm so glad to be here. I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.